This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
At WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. And you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And there we go. Now it finally decided to come up. Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Yeah, Chappy Chanukah.
Chanukah.
Yeah.
What is the proper spelling?
What a perfect day to ask that.
Oh, look at your shirt. Oh, my gosh.
Right. So before I move away. Right, and so it's,
all the crossouts.
Yeah, all the different crossouts. And that's not unexpected, because Hanukkah is properly spelled Chet Nun Kaf Hey, because it's in Hebrew.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
All right, and the reason for why is it CH, why is it H, is because in English we really don't have a Ch sound.
That's true.
Right? We don't say Lachlomen.
Right.
And there's a variety of Ch sounds. There are two of them in Hebrew.
Okay.
Two different letters that spell, and it's a Chaf actually. No, a Kaf, because it's Hanukkah. So Chet, which is one of the Ch sounds, and then,
So it's Hanukkah is the proper?
Hanukkah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then, of course, the other thing that influences the spelling is whether you put the accent on the first syllable or on the last syllable. Hebrew tends to accent the last syllable of a word.
Syllable.
And that's what I say to students. So, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why. Yeah. I couldn't resist this T-shirt for that very reason.
Oh yeah, that's hysterical.
I had that once. I was talking not too long ago with somebody about an interfaith conference that I was a part of at Lakeside, Ohio, which in what seems like a prior life. But it was Children of Abraham Journey Together. Really kind of cool.
Interesting.
And I was talking in one of the classes that I led for that workshop. We did it a number of years in a row at Lakeside, Ohio, and a shout out to Amy Shaw for her part in coordinating it and actually pulling me into it. And that's part of how we met. It's one of the places we got to know each other.
Wow.
And I was explaining about Midrash, which is legends and stories and stuff like that. From drash, to explain, to search out, so to search out the meaning. And somebody asked me how to spell it in the group, and I answered with the Hebrew, because that is the proper way to spell it. It's a Hebrew word that's transliterated, not translated, but transliterated into...
All right, back up the difference.
Okay, translation tells you what the word means. Transliteration is the sounding out of that word in a different language.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Okay, so, for example, when we use Beijing, that's an attempt at sounding out what the Chinese sounds like, because it's not properly written in English, it's properly written in Chinese.
Okay, yeah.
All right, and so Hanukkah is the name of the holiday. It means dedication. So it's the dedication of the temple that the Maccabees did, the Hasmoneans did when they kicked out the Assyrians and the Greeks. We usually say Assyrians so as not to bring offense to Greeks. But, we can really thank Alexander the Great, who died, by the way, at the age of 32. So it was not a long time that he took to conquer the then known world.
Sounds like he had a full life, though.
He had a very busy life. He was
Yeah.
busy, killing people for the most part.
Yes.
Instilling Greek law and obliterating local culture. Because he really did. He it's kind of like the Borg. Right? Resistance is futile. Because he was just such a massive army and just came in, and Aristotle helped him figure out how to do that. Aristotle's an interesting. He was his teacher.
Wait a minute. I thought he was way before his time.
No, Aristotle was
No?
Alexander the Great's teacher.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And Aristotle learned from Plato, who learned from Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
But Socrates and Plato were both much more egalitarian, much more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Even though and to their fault, definitely, they thought of better and lesser human beings. It was the culture of the time. Citizens were worth more, and the rest of the peons were not. But Aristotle hated women.
Kind of like now. Oh, no. There are some leaders that are
There
like
are some
that
leaders
now.
that are, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's always been, have and have-nots. And
Yeah.
it's hard for some people to get past the idea that somehow they're better than everybody else. The reality is none of us is. We're all part of the big puzzle of life, the mosaic of life. And as long as we can each individually shine, we add to the picture. When we do things that are not shining, we diminish the picture.
Yeah. Wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah. So Hanukkah. This is the dreidel, one of the most...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
brought
Jeff
this...
posted one spinning, too.
Yeah, you can
like
do
a-
that. They're
yeah.
easy to spin.
Yeah.
Just
spin it
twist
like a
it.
top. Yeah.
Well, it is a
Whoop.
top. There it goes. Bye-bye.
There it goes.
It just went off the table. That's one of the things that they do, and that's part of why I brought multiples. So the letters on it do mean something. They stand for a great miracle happened there. And like most things of that ilk, I'm not sure that the meaning was there before the toy, but that it got put on the toy.
These almost look like letters.
They are letters. They're
They
Hebrew
are
letters.
They're Hebrew letters.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
The nun for nes, a miracle. Gadol, the gimel, great.
Oh, okay.
Haya, happened.
Yeah.
And in America and in most of the world, we use a shin saying sham, meaning there. If you buy one of these in Israel, it'll have a fe there for here. A great miracle happened here.
Oh, sure, naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a
That's
funny
cool.
story that one of my mentors tells, Rabbi John Spitzer, of being in Israel when he was a young student, and he saw a container of these for sale in a store in Jerusalem, not surprisingly,
Uh-huh.
around Hanukkah, and he figured, well, they're on sale because somebody had misprinted them by putting the pay instead of the shin.
Oh,
And then
wow.
then he finally figured it out. But yeah, so there's
happened
also a
here.
way, a great
Yeah.
miracle happened here. And I don't know that these big ones will do it so well, but let me try. No, not so easily.
No.
I tend to spin them upside down. The little ones spin real easy. These are, there we go, just
It
real
almost,
briefly.
almost got
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Very briefly. So these are a little wobblier. They're not quite so. It takes a little bit of, they're not really square. You can see that. They're not really quite square. And yeah. Not well manufactured, but they kind of function.
Sure. Hey, why not?
Yeah, it's a fun game. It can be played with raisins, raisinets. I often play it with erasers, gold, theoretically gold coins, but you shouldn't be gambling with your Hanukkah gelt. It's an interesting tradition. It's traditional to give children gelt, money, the Yiddish word for money, coming from the German, and that was so that they could pay for their tuition for the coming year.
All right. That gets us back to the early days of ESPN. When
Okay.
Dave Shepard and Jeff Israel would bring these in.
Yeah.
And, of course, we would
There'd be a
Gamble our hearts out.
there'd be this kind of almost craps game going with the
There
dreidel.
was. It was.
It can get heated.
It was the old ESPN version of.
I have watched people go through an entire bag to find just the dreidel that spins just the way they want it to.
Oh my goodness!
It's a fun thing. I've actually got a little bit of a dreidel collection at home, and they're easy. They're small, for the most part. Yeah, there are some big ones. I've got some that are about 6 to 8 inches across. And this is not the only style. There's one that's a round disc, and wherever it comes to settle.
Well, it was very funny in our massive gambling days with the dreidels at ESPN. It was, it was the women on the staff.
Whoa, that wanted to play?
And they were so successful at it. And I don't know whether it was just the way they would twist their wrists or whatever that, the guys were just over the top. But
John Wayning it?
Yeah, but they used to come out and kick everybody. It was great. It was a lot of fun. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I do a decent job of spinning.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Oh yeah. There you go. Yeah.
And catching it when it wants to go off the table. So dreidels are fun. They're just they're not a serious symbol, and yet everybody recognizes it. And of course, there's the "I have a little dreidel." Actually, there was a funny one that my husband showed me, which was 2 cats saying they had a little dreidel. They made it out of clay, and now it's under the sofa, and there it will stay. The cat's batting it under, and the cats do like to watch you play. The noise just attracts them.
The new stuff that was on Facebook, I don't know whether you've seen it, cats pulling down the trees.
Oh, yeah. That's not new.
No, I know. That's
been
but
around as long as there's been cats.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah. We have 2 cats, and so one of the things that my husband says is it's a good thing we're not Christian, because otherwise we'd have to anchor that thing down with guy wire.
Well, there were a couple pieces of video where the cat is on, like, the windowsill, jumps over to the tree, and then topples a tree. It's like...
Well, they expect it to be a tree, not just held up by 2 little pieces of wood.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. And of course, tinsel and ornaments are just, irresistible for cats.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a funny story in my past, back when we used to sell the jewelry, and I was sitting in my kitchen peacefully just measuring out gold chain, because gold chain is priced by the weight. And so I would take a chain, weigh it, make out the tag, and hang it on this little rack that I had.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I know where this
I
is going.
I got somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of it done, and all of a sudden there's this flying cat coming over my shoulder.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Gold chain everywhere. It was so much fun. And screaming at the cat.
Yes. I think I do more than that.
Yeah,
It would be the last day of the cat in the house.
No, well, the only thing that changed was that when I had to do pricing on gold chain in the house, that the cat got locked in the bedroom.
Yes, okay. Well, it didn't
Find
take
the cat,
you long.
lock the cat up.
It didn't take you long.
No, we learned.
Oh, my gosh.
I learned.
That's so funny.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It was probably 30 or 40 gold chains.
Oh, no.
That were just scattered.
No.
And,
Oh.
But,
Oh, my.
they weren't damaged. They were just scattered.
Sure. Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. It's fun. But cats do have a certain a tendency to want to topple. Well, not to
Yes.
topple. They want to climb, actually.
Okay.
So there's 2 kinds of cats in general. There's what we call ground cats and tree cats. The ground cats don't tend to jump high. They may jump onto a table or a chair, but they're not the ones that are going to go way high in your house. The tree cats will go up the cat tree. They'll go up on top of the curtain if they can. They'll walk on the... We've got a little ledge on one of the tops of one of the windows, and he likes to walk on there. One of the cats, not both of them.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah. So there are tree cats and ground cats. And we've had both. And the ground cats are easier to work with, but the tree cats are fun. It doesn't really matter. They're all welcome in our house when they live there.
There you go.
But
So you mentioned the dreidels and everything is the fun aspect of it.
yeah,
But as you also mentioned before, that Hanukkah is a fun season.
it is.
Unlike the very sobering fall.
Right. It's a joyous celebration. It's patterned after Sukkot. We get that from the book of Maccabees. That one of they wanted to do 8 days because they wanted it to be like the festival of Sukkot or Tabernacles, because that's when the original temple had been dedicated. And I think it's Maccabees 2 or 3 that explains that they weren't ready to dedicate it. They hadn't finished cleaning it, and they took out. There's a couple of really interesting pieces in the story. They took out the stones of the altar that had been desecrated by the pig sacrifices to Zeus, and took them and put them somewhere because they didn't know what to do with them. They didn't know whether to destroy them, keep them, what they should do, because they were holy and sanctified, but then they'd been desecrated by the Zeus stuff. So they take those out and they just set them down and they say someday there'll be a prophet who will tell us what to do with them, but as of right now we'll just leave them there. And they made fresh stones, and so they totally gutted and rebuilt the inside of the temple.
Wow.
And cleaned what they could clean, and what they couldn't, what they weren't sure, because stones are porous, so you don't know what's hiding inside they didn't want to risk.
Yeah, again, the stones were porous.
Yeah.
The concrete is something I never even thought of
Yeah.
until the condo collapsed in Miami, that concrete is porous.
Yeah. Concrete, stones, everything, all of that.
Yeah.
Some stones are more porous than others, obviously. And, you can... One of the things that I get a kick out of, in a funny kind of way, in an odd kind of way, not ha-ha funny, but if you look at the Western Wall, which is a courtyard wall for the temple, it's not the temple wall, it's the retaining wall around the courtyard. That's what the Western...
This is the Wailing Wall?
Well, some
no?
people call it wail. Wailing is
Oh.
a derogatory term.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, because
Really?
it talks about crying, yeah. It implies that the Jews have been destroyed and are wailing.
Oh.
So it's called the Western Wall. And it's the
Okay.
western courtyard wall of the complex. And the temple was somewhere on top of it, and who knows exactly where. I know there are people who think they know, but we don't really have accurate maps, and we don't have video from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News.
Why not?
Well, this is a little bit of a time travel problem. And but in any event, if you look at that, the beautiful courtyard that Israel has built at that wall, and you look at the stones themselves, and you can see that some of them are really in lousy shape. And that's because they come from they were cheaters then. There were stone sellers that claimed they came from the certified quarries, but they didn't. So they were dressed to look good enough and got into the wall, and they don't hold up as well as their friends.
Must have been related to Donald Trump.
I'm not
sorry.
going.
I'm sorry.
I'm not going
I
there.
shouldn't have done that.
I'm not going there. But in any event, so there have been cheaters in contracting since dirt. Is the bottom line. If people think they can get away with something, they will.
You know what amazes me is, you look at, in the United States, buildings just dilapidated at like 20 or 30 years old. And then you look at Europe and you look, in Israel, and you see buildings that are hundreds of years old.
Thousands.
Or thousands that
are still
are
standing.
in great shape.
The Romans came up with concrete, folks.
Okay, so that was a Roman thing.
Yeah. And they paved roads, and they did all kinds of amazing. They built aqueducts. Some of those are still standing. Some of those still run water. And they also unfortunately used lead pipe, which did not help their continuation. It led to disease among the wealthy.
Ooh.
Yeah, because the wealthy could afford the fancy new pipes.
Okay.
But there wasn't a consumer protection agency to say, don't do that. Don't use lead. Lead is dangerous.
Yeah.
We
yeah.
didn't, even in America, if you go into some of the really old buildings, you could find lead paint.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Right. And one of the challenges with that is that kids will eat it because kids are oral. Right. So they grab something and it immediately goes in the mouth so they can test it. And lead paint is not edible.
Some of the old buildings in L.A.
Some of the old buildings, yeah.
It was
L.A., New York,
Sure.
all of the older, not Port St. Lucie, because there was a tree here then.
Yes. Yeah, if it's before 30 years ago,
Yeah.
there wasn't much here.
That's so hard to explain to people how new Port St. Lucie is. There are not old buildings.
Well, you figure we got here, it was 30 years ago this week, to take a look at
Congratulations.
the city, yeah, and see if we were going to buy WPSL. And then there are 50,000 people here then.
Yeah.
50,000, and we're at, 250 now, and it's going to almost triple.
It's good. Oh, it's huge. I drive by in the tradition area,
Mm-hmm.
and the amount of building and the amount of infilling. When we moved into the neighborhood that we live in now, there was, I'd say, 1 out of 3 lots that were built on and developed. And it was a wonderful place to live because the animals were there and there was a ton of natural stuff there. But now when they come in, they plow everything under and they destroy the habitat for the animals and it's rough.
I remember, I think we were here 3 years, and there was a huge brush fire in southwest Port St. Lucie, and I guess over 40 homes were damaged. It was unbelievable, but you think, but at the time, it hadn't been filled in yet.
Yeah.
And that's it. It was dry brush, and it just whipped through the neighborhoods there.
Well, and that's not all that different a time from when Mount Lemmon burned.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Mount Lemmon taught the forestry division was that you need to let the little fires burn because they protect the forest. They had a zero tolerance, so they put fires out immediately. And what they discovered was that way the dry underbrush was there, and it made the forest unhealthy. The small fires get rid of that.
Mm-hmm. I remember Jerry Brown. It was 1975 when we were talking about this, and he was saying that the folks in the assembly were blocking his plans to allow the Forest Service or State Forest Service to go in and do a little backfiring to eliminate some of the catastrophes that we've had just in the last few years. And the state still doesn't do it.
No, the state still doesn't get it.
I think Arizona did.
Better.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But not perfectly, because
True.
We just had another. Now, it was not as devastating. There was another fire that went up the side of the mountain and took out pieces, but it wasn't the devastation that it was when the lemon was burning.
Yeah.
And I remember tire fires too, but that's a different story. That was up north.
Oh, Goodyear? Oh, God. Oh.
I don't know that
They must burn forever.
Tires will burn a good long time because there's a lot of oil in them. So yeah, they tire fires are almost impossible to put out.
Wow.
And I can remember when I was a traffic watch pilot once, there had been a tire, one of the tire dumps had caught fire, and you could see that black smoke for miles and miles.
I'll bet.
And miles. Yeah.
I'll bet. And it's thick and black.
And it's very thick and very black.
Yeah. Wow.
And you don't want to breathe it.
That too.
Yeah. So lots of things. Nature tries to handle itself. It tries to clean the environment. And fire's one of the ways that it cleans. That's one of the ways that they sanctify. It's one of the ways in Scripture when somebody has contracted a skin a contagious skin disease. And it's not just leprosy. There's a variety of contagious skin diseases. And some are not. And the Bible actually has a protocol for determining whether or not the skin affliction is contagious. And when it is, when it's one of the ones that'll travel and embed itself in garments, in fabric, and on the walls, then there's a whole description about you put these things through the fire to get rid of it, and you wash the clothing, and it's a long, detailed description of how to purify things, and it's an interesting piece. And when I've talked to nurses, they're like, yeah, that's exactly the protocol that we would use. So they knew how to do things. They may not have understood the entire mechanism, but they got parts of it for sure.
And that's years ago.
That's at least 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
At least 2,000 years ago.
Well, Dr. Scheib talks about the Chinese acupuncture.
Yeah.
And he said, you have to understand, these pressure points, doctors have known this for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And had been working in China with this for thousands of years.
We know all kinds of things and learn things over time, and we tend to forget them at times when it would have been helpful to remember. But medicine's been around. The Arabs brought surgical procedures and equipment with them to Europe when they conquered the then known world.
I didn't know that.
Yep, they brought a lot of things with them. They brought...
So that was the Arabs. Huh.
Yeah, the Arabs brought that, and they brought guitars.
Really?
Yeah, that's how guitars get to Spain.
Oh.
And it's how the Swiss watch movement gets to Switzerland as well. They needed to tell time. It's the coffee. There is some reality to that. Right? Coffee helps people stay up longer and later and get up earlier. And so as a result, the Muslims pray 5 times a day. Once is before sunrise, and the other one is after sunset. So they've extended the day. Judaism has 3 in the morning. Well, it actually works out to 5. When you first get up, you say a prayer in the bed. Then there's a morning prayer, an afternoon, and an evening prayer. And then there's a prayer said on the bed at night, too. But these are communal. These can be communal gatherings in Muslim communities. And so they need a way to tell time, because their windows are much more narrow and precise. So they need to tell time. Time was not that important in ancient Judaism. Sundials would have been fine.
Well, but wasn't the original Judea an ag community?
Yeah.
So it would have been the sun and the moon.
It would have been, yeah, and that's why the calendar is intercalated. The calendar is a lunar calendar, as most ancient calendars are. Even the Muslim calendar is lunar, because everybody can look up and see what phase of the moon at least once a day, and you can remember for a day.
Maybe you can. I can't.
Understand. We would have both been very old in those days. But most people can remember and if you don't, your neighbor does. So it was easy to keep track of where in the phase of the moon you were. And you don't have to be very old to realize the moon goes through these phases every month. It does it over and over and over again. The crops, however, are solar. They don't care where the moon is. And so when it's an ag society, an agricultural, agrarian society, they have to pay attention to the sun. But the sun doesn't divide into nice, easy 29.5 day units. She said a little bit facetiously. But you can always tell when the new moon is, right? Moon month, there's a connection there. And the solar calendar was people who were not so much agricultural as they were city dwellers. And so the solar system was more, the sun and the relative position of the earth to the sun was much more important. And so we see the solar calendar coming out of Greece and Rome. And the Sumerians do a good job of dividing it up it's not. It's approximately 365 days. Right. And kind of a quarter, almost. And it's not quite 29 and a half kind of days, kind of, sort of. And the other part that I always had fun talking with some people was that every day is not exactly 24 hours. Some days are 23 hours and minutes, and other days are 24 hours and minutes, or seconds, or whatever. Because the Earth not only spins on its axis, but it also wobbles.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're not. It's kind of like this dreidel, right? The dreidel doesn't spin perfectly; it wobbles in its rotation. So
does our little globe.
So does our globe. Yeah, as we spin through space, and the speed of the spin is changing very, very slightly. That's another interesting piece, but billions and billions of years until this little spinning top settles down or topples.
You know what's really neat, that new telescope that's out there, or whatever, they took a shot of the planet, and then way off in the distance you see this little speck, which is us.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my.
Yeah. Gives you some perspective. I love when you see the big representations of the solar system, and there's a little thing that says, you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great piece somewhere on the internet. You can find it where they go from the solar system down into the Earth, down to us, and then go microscopic and show that we're just system upon system upon system of the same thing. And who knows how big it gets and how small it gets. I don't know. It's an interesting piece, right?
Sure.
Because there's the same kind of orbiting going on at a cellular, at an atomic level, right?
So would you want to go to Mars? Would you want to colonize Mars?
No,
No,
I'm perfect. I'm old enough and perfectly content. There's many, many places on this planet that I have yet to explore, and I'm just hoping for enough years of good health to be able to do some of that.
Yeah, that's the key.
It absolutely is. As the axiom says, youth is wasted on the young. But I am definitely enjoying the couple weeks off, the break between classes. I've been working with some students though on dissertations, and I love doing that. I love helping graduate students organize their thoughts and be their bouncing wall, if you will, so that we can talk and discuss the questions, and their writing gets so much better.
Mm-hmm. That's intriguing. That's, when you get up in that whole graduate level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because just as my students are really not prepared for college, and I say that lovingly, neither at IRSC nor at Kaiser are the students really prepared for what college is going to demand of them.
How much of that is COVID, do you think?
COVID certainly made it worse. COVID made a lot of things worse.
Mm-hmm.
One of the papers of one of the students that I'm dealing with now is dealing with the effect of COVID on students with autism.
Oh, wow.
Because a lot of their special education is in-person, one-on-one education.
Naturally.
And COVID messed that up beyond words. And so this community of caregivers that had surrounded each child, that constellation, disappeared for 2 years to some extent. And it happened overnight. There was not enough time. Zoom wasn't quite what it is now. Now it's a wonderful product, but it had some serious little flakes in it in the very beginning. And those were just things you had to work through, and certainly the Zoom company has worked to make that an excellent product, and there's others like it, and FaceTime on the phone. I can remember doing that before, and as we've talked, my congregation has Zoomed or has streamed in one way or another since its inception.
Mm-hmm.
And We've always made that available to people. But even before that, my Tucson congregation participated in Blog Talk Radio. I'm not even sure that website's still out there.
We used to have a talk show host, Ray Lucie, out of San Diego. And he was on a San Diego radio station. I think he started
Blog Talk Radio?
On Blog Talk Radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was out of Dallas or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we did Blog Talk Radio for our Friday night and Saturday morning services, both in Tucson. And I know that we had listeners all over the world. There was a group from Turkey that used to listen in.
That's cool.
And, we could, there was limited texting back and forth or chatting back then. But we did some of it. So I've had that
texted
since.
back then.
Yeah.
Really?
They could do
the message.
They could
part
do
of that.
comments. Yeah, they could do comments.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get
it. And the woman who was a shout out to Adria, the woman who was running the Blog Talk for us, she would type back things in the comments, and so there was this running commentary underneath the transmission itself. And I don't think they are still up there. I think they've since disappeared because of the space requirements. But we had archived those for a good long time. And when I first moved here, there was a group that wanted me to continue Blog Talk. So we did, and what I would do is I would call in and leave the phone up on the pulpit, and it would just capture what it captured.
Wow.
But yeah, the original.
Well, things have changed.
And I will say that I did that because that same John Spitzer that I talked about, one of my mentors, he had the Roberta broadcast system. They didn't broadcast every service, but they did at least one a month, where they had a conference call system. It was closed. You dialed into it, but you could hear the service being piped into that. And the reason for that, and the reason that I've always done it, is that there are always shut-ins. There are always people traveling.
Mm-hmm.
There are always people who can't physically be in the sanctuary, who want to be part of the service, who want to see what's going on. And I can remember one year when I was going to a conference out west, or maybe it was my graduation. It might have been my graduation, I'm not sure. But I get into the airport out west, and on my phone is the service. I see the B'nai Mitzvah, the students, running the service because they were running it that week. And
so cool.
I watched,
okay.
My own congregation
sure.
have its service, and that was so cool.
Yeah. Wow.
And
how many other temples do you think around the country are doing what you've been doing for years?
Now more. Obviously, almost all of them went to it during Zoom. I don't think the Orthodox did, but some congregations went to outdoor and didn't Zoom. But most of them, I think, have gone to some form of Zooming.
Okay, you talk about the Orthodox.
Because they don't like electricity.
Yes. So how did they?
So I think they
get around that?
I think they mostly just went outside the building and people just came there. But in a lot of, there are communities that ignored COVID. And some parts of the Hasidic community, it just is. Sharon is saying here, Sharon from Tucson is saying, Chris sometimes watches Central Synagogue in New York City. They've streamed for a long time, and they post on YouTube, so you can watch bits and pieces of their service.
But they're not Orthodox.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, they're a special New York brand.
Okay.
They're their own little brand, and being in New York City and having all of the talent of New York City, they have an amazing cantorial staff.
Oh, I bet.
And they have an amazing rabbinic staff, and
Yeah, well, our morning guy was in Brooklyn, and for a few days this week, and he was talking about. I think it's the Hasidic Jews that have wear the hats and stuff.
The black.
Yeah, he said it was fascinating. And he said it was a huge neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
that was just all Hasidic. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
Williamsburg.
Okay, I think that's what he said. Yeah.
Wow. Probably have family somewhere in that mess.
You think so?
Yeah, pretty sure.
Oh wow. Distant family.
Nah, I'm not all that distant.
Okay.
Pretty close cousins. Just not ones that I'm in active contact with.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So now the Hasidics, are they in other areas?
Yes, yeah.
of the
They're
country?
not as big. I think the LA one might be pretty big. There's a big one in Toronto. There's a big community in Chicago. The bigger cities can support a large. It's just like everything else. If you've got the population, you can support larger minority groups.
See, I don't remember seeing Hasidic Jews in L.A. I obviously saw them all the time in New York, but
It's a function of how and where you are,
yeah,
because they're going to be close to their synagogues because they have to walk.
that's right.
So they're not going to be sprawling suburban kind of communities. They're going to be tight-knit, close in. Plus, they're going to be somewhere where they can put a wire around it so that they can create what's called an A-roof, a fence around the community for Shabbat, so that baby carriages can go out and stuff like that. Because you have to create an artificial courtyard concept. And there's a great scene of that if you watch Unorthodox. When Esty leaves, it's actually Shabbat, and the A-roof is down, the fence is down. And so all of the mothers are with their strollers in the building waiting for somebody to tell them that they can go outside. And in that environment, she's able to walk out because she doesn't have a baby. So she can walk straight out.
So do they have, like, women bringing their children and stuff like that? They can sit through the normal ceremonies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandmother of blessed memory, when I stayed with her in Brooklyn in the summers, I would go with her to services. And we would walk, and she talked to everybody on the street. She knew everybody, and it seemed that way, at least when I was a young kid. And she would talk to them. It was a special time. It was a day of not doing the businesses, and then they would catch up socially with each other and gossip and get the latest news and all of that. All of those functions.
It was interesting. My old intern who married outside the Jewish religion, talking with his father once, and he was lamenting the fact that, as he called it, interracial marriage. It wasn't, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Mixed
you know
marriage.
where I'm going. Mixed marriage, yeah. That was going. He feared that was going to change Judaism in years to come.
Well, it did, and it has, and I like to think that it's brought a lot of people in. One of my colleagues says it's God's way of invigorating the gene pool, keeping it from getting too narrow.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that I used to teach, and I haven't taught it in years, but at IRSC, Religion in America. And that specifically looks at religions as they come in waves of immigration into the U.S. And it also looks at the native religion and all of that. But one of the things that I tell people in that class is that America changes every religion that comes to its shores, and that religion changes America. It's not a one-way. It's
that's
not a
nice.
one-way street, because we learn more from each religion. Every religion has some part of the puzzle of who and what are human beings, and who or what is that force that gives us life that we call God. And I don't think any one of us has the whole picture. The more I've studied, the more convinced I am of that there's just so much to God, that God is bigger than any religion. And everybody's got a glimpse, everybody's got a way of approaching that centrality of life. that we can learn. It doesn't mean, if I learn about Catholicism, it doesn't mean I'm Catholic. If I learn about Hinduism, it doesn't mean I'm a Hindu. But I can learn how and what they see and how they perceive the universe and how they perceive God. And it can help inform and explain some of the things because, hey, I'm sorry, Judaism, Christianity, none of those things grew up in a vacuum. I've talked about it before. That's that Silk Road. And, we use a Chinese ornamental fruit for Sukkot. Hello, folks.
Yeah.
Frankincense and myrrh come from Yemen. And they got into Israel. They don't grow natively in Israel. So there's clearly trade, not only, plants,
Sure.
of course, are going to be traded up and down because they're pretty, they're fun, they're attractive, and there are idiots like me who love to grow things. And that's not changed. It's the only thing that's different now is that we can transport things so much better, and we can build greenhouses so that in Pennsylvania they can grow desert rose.
Sure, yeah.
And Biosphere 2, a wonderful example of how you can make anything an environment for anything if you're willing to spend enough money and put enough time and energy.
Someday
into it.
Carol and I are going to get there. I really want to see that place.
It's an amazing place. It's a shout out, and that's a splinter group. They're into Gaia, so yeah, and that's part of what drove them to come up with this idea that that's aimed at eventual colonization, which brings us back around to the colonizing Mars. They were testing out the theory, can we create a self-sustaining micro-world? Because if we're going to colonize Mars, we've got to be able to do that. We've got to be able to keep under glass everything that the folks who live there need.
Wow. Yeah.
And it just is that important because the climate is not hospitable to we human beings.
Right.
And we wouldn't last. And not everybody can run around in a spacesuit and live in a tiny shell and be productive. I mean, how are you going to get food? You've got to be able to grow the food. You've got to be able to have the animals to work, and you need insects, and you need all kinds of things that are in the microsystem.
Wait a minute. Who needs
system.
insects?
Well, there are some that you don't need. So, as Biosphere
Mosquitoes.
2, there are things that eat them. I try to remind myself of that when they're swarming. But there's a humorous anecdote in one of the people who was in. I think the book is called 2 Years and 20 Minutes. And it's written by one of the people who was in the original crew. And she and her husband, they actually became a couple in Biosphere 2. And they then got married and built a house somewhere in the vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly you can see it from Biosphere 2, or you can see whatever. But it's close. It's an eye shot. And she wrote that book, and there's a fun piece in it where they talk about a scorpion that accidentally got in, and that it runs across the table, and the comment is, well, that was the first species to go extinct in Biosphere 2.
Yes, you bet.
And so they recognized that there were things. There were certainly some insects they would have liked to have extincted that were just too prolific, and picking them off of the garden plants was a major, major effort because they couldn't use insecticide. They recognized that if they put insecticide on the plants, it would be in their water.
It would kill them.
It would kill them.
Wow.
Because there wasn't anywhere near as much purification time as there is on Earth, and I'm not convinced that we're not eating some of the horrible things that we certainly on fruit and veggies, right?
Yeah.
So as we come to tonight, we've got the Night of 10,000 Lights at Eitz Chayim, where everybody's invited to come with a Chanukiah, a Hanukkah menorah. Menorah means lamp. So menorah is not just for Hanukkah. It's any, there are two menorahs on the ceiling. The fluorescents, right? They're menorot. And so a Hanukkah menorah is a special menorah that has the 8 and 1 for each, the 8 candles, 1 for each night, and the shamash, the lead candle. And it represents the purity of life. And we will be doing 6 of those candles tonight. Tomorrow will be the 6th day. And then the 7th day is Sunday, and the 8th day is in Kwanzaa this year. I love how it flips and joins with other things. So, yeah. Hanukkah, this year, instead of singeing the feathers on the turkey, are helping to singe the tree, I guess. I don't But in any event, we're going to celebrate that tonight, amid with latkes and jelly donuts, which is the Israeli round and fried in oil, and pastelikas from the Sephardi community.
Wow.
So wishing everyone, whatever holiday you celebrate at this time of the darkest night, in the season of the solstice, may whatever holiday you celebrate fill you with wonder and joy and happiness. May there be peace in the world. Please, God, help us. We need some help with that, for sure. So wishing a great holiday, whether you celebrate Christmas, Kwanzaa, or any other festival in this season. There's 27 or so of them. Happy holidays, folks. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, and this has been Ask a Rabbi.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, talking the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world. Happy Hanukkah, young lady.